I will not fall.
So everyone's making their videos about the detectives and the Pikachus, and I thought that I would just make a quick video covering my thoughts. Unfortunately, as I started writing the script, this ended up being a much heftier undertaking than I thought, and what was originally supposed to be a couple of nitpicks quickly turned into a meandering script that makes it seem like I hate the film. To be honest, I don't hate it, but I did walk out feeling a little underwhelmed. Regardless, it would appear that what I was looking for in this movie and what everyone else was hoping for clearly don't match up. So yes, this is a clear and concise, controversial opinion warning.
Torches! Get your torches!
All I'm saying is don't get your knickers in a twist because some YouTube man with less than 500 subscribers said something that goes against what you thought. Also, off the bat, I am putting a minor spoiler warning up. I'd argue that the spoilers aren't really that big of a deal in this movie since the film's so predictable to begin with that it practically spoils itself through cliches and overshadowing to ridiculous levels, and overshowing the film in the trailers, which I'll get to later, but hey, some people believe that it's something to be worried about. So, last chance before I slightly spoil the film even though I'm not going into any specific plot details, oh no! If you haven't seen the film, I'd still recommend you go watch it for reasons I'll get into later, but you have been warned. So, first off, the good. There are things to enjoy in this film. Even since the recent Godzilla franchise, Legendary has proven that they know how to treat a franchise with respect. Well, most of the time. As far as the heart and soul of the franchise goes, it has indeed carried over quite well. The Pokemon themselves look absolutely phenomenal. Yes, at times the CGI looks cheap, but at the very least you can get a sense of each of their personalities, as opposed to several uses of CGI in modern blockbusters. It's also brilliant that they captured the practical applications and personalities as well, very similarly to how the anime depicts them. Yes, I have been keeping up with the Sun and Moon anime, or at least I've made a poor attempt to, and to see them represented in full force with thought and effort put into each of their uses does warm my heart. Of course, I can't exactly show you comparisons with the anime because the animation studio, OLM, is a nightmare when it comes to
Oh, looks like you briefly mentioned copyright material. That's a big no-no, so we're gonna have to force you to watch this incredibly outdated and frankly misinformed video about the bullshit that is the YouTube copyright system.
Those copyright bots. They're getting worse. The art design carries over to the other aspects of the film as well. The film has a very unique aesthetic, outside of the Pokemon themselves. Whilst the film didn't have the highest budget to create the most expansive fake city, the studio used what they had to create something truly special. I appreciate that, because often when it comes to CGI and other special effects, several design aspects blend together between films. This could have easily looked like any other futuristic city, but fortunately they were able to create something that stands out here. The acting is pretty solid, for the most part. And I cannot stress how good wrong Nye. There we go. No matter which film he's in, Bill Nye always has a commanding presence on screen, and his inclusion, as always, is greatly appreciated. And the music! Oh my god, the music! This has to be the greatest soundtrack from a video game movie ever. The use of sound fonts from the Pokemon games is utterly brilliant. The composer has done a bunch of other stuff before, but his previous work hasn't exactly been memorable. Here though, well damn, I'm gonna add this soundtrack to my playlist as soon as it hits Spotify. As someone who grew up with Gen 4 and 5, this music aesthetic was right up my alley. Unfortunately, this is where things take a turn for the worse. See, this film revels in the perfection of its own aesthetic and its faithfulness to the original source material, but it seems like that's where all the attention went. The two primary issues in this film are these: the writing and the pacing. Now, if these were on their own, they would only be slightly problematic, and I could overlook it and enjoy the film overall. But when paired together and when placed in the forefront, you create an unholy abomination. I get that Pokemon thrives on being somewhat of a ridiculous concept and having a brisk pace, ignoring the endless padding in the anime and some of the more recent games. Thank you, Masuda! But this isn't a video game. This is a movie. Things need to be changed. Plot points need to be shuffled. Scripts need to actually be cohesive. So, I guess let's start off with the pacing, as the issues with that lead directly into the script. This film introduces a lot of great concepts: abandonment, ostracization, introversion versus extroversion, and so on and so forth. The problem is that this film is paced so lightning fast that none of these elements get time to shine. We're seeing Tim try to catch a Pokemon and then bam, his dad's pronounced dead, then bam, he meets Pikachu, then bam, Apom attack, and then bam, they're having a heartwarming speech about friendship. These story beats are fine on their own, but without breathing space between them, it's very hard to care about the characters. Tim starts out as a compelling character, and his acting sells us on the concept that these CGI darlings are truly on screen with him. He's just an average guy who wants to get by in life without being pestered by the equivalent of 90s Pokemania. Ryan Reynolds as Pikachu is also a blast to watch. His wit is as snappy as ever, and theoretically the two of them could have great chemistry, but without the breathing room, without slower character-driven moments that don't impact the plot in some shape or form, you don't believe that they truly care for each other. It just feels like the studio executives want you to believe that they have a deep friendship, when it shouldn't have felt like that. It should have been a genuine bond created through organic storytelling. For those telling me that the film is long enough as is, you can clearly see that the runtime is bordering on a Lupin the Third TV special. I suppose that's what you get when you cram the plot of a... Wait, hang on a second. 12 to 13 hour game into an incredibly short film. Granted, the issue is far more prevalent in the first act than the last two, but when that's the time when you're supposed to sell us on the characterization, you know you've screwed up. Yes, there are some interesting and engaging action scenes as the film goes on, but when I don't care about the characters to begin with, it just ends up feeling like CGI schlock, regardless of whether the Pokemon are uniquely showing off their powers or not. The thing is, many have said that they actually enjoy this kind of pacing. I mean, okay, but what? In some sense, I can see why certain moviegoers would enjoy a film being paced in such a way. What they've done here is definitely preferable over a film that drags its feet and fumbles through boring beats. Such breakneck pacing can work. For example, the Lego movies, coincidentally also distributed by Warner Brothers and also featuring a banger soundtrack. Holy shit, they got Beck? What the f***? Lewis Cole? Are you kidding me? But the difference here is twofold. Not only does the style of storytelling lend itself to faster pacing, given that it's satirizing classic YouTube stop-motion parodies and mimicking the mind of a child, oh, big spoiler, but the writing was so meticulously calculated that the characterization can be delivered on the fly. I mean, it was helped by the fact that the Lego movies know when to slow down and offer introspection to certain key characters, but regardless of who's writing which movie, the writing is always on point. Yeah, Detective Pikachu doesn't have that. Here lies the second main issue of the movie. The writing is abysmal. So much of what happens in the film is incredibly stupid, to the point where there are moments of genuine frustration. As stated earlier, the film rushes from plot point to plot point in an effort to show off as many landmarks as possible. It's clear that a studio executive had a checklist of what they wanted so they could please fans, and the writers were forced to cobble them together in a pastiche of trash. Trastiche. I'll show myself out. This leads to many moments where the characters are just being pulled along by the plot, as opposed to controlling the direction where it goes. Yo, Dan, we need a scene where Detective Pikachu fights a Charizard, so I need you to link it up with the scene where Bill Nye chews the scenery for 5 minutes, and then connect that with the Mewtwo scene.
Won't that give away the plot twist?
Off, Dan, I need my money! Which leads me to the predictability of the story overall. A detective story lives and dies by its mystery, and while some would argue that this film is an action-adventure as opposed to a detective story, well, that's the fault of the film, as the source material is literally a puzzle game. It's alright if the audience is kept in the dark until the detective explains everything. It's even alright if the audience figures things out whilst the detective does. It is not okay when your movie is so predictable that you outpace your own protagonists. Every plot twist in this movie, if you can even call them that, is so bleeding obvious that nothing surprises you. The only thing I didn't see coming was in relation to one of the villain's henchmen. But even then, what they do with the henchman's power after the revelation is incredibly underwhelming. Yet for some reason, many of these moviegoers are glossing over the sheer stupidity of this film and hailing it as the best video game movie ever made. Oh yeah, sure, just completely forget about the Professor Layton film, yeah! Now, I'm not saying it's nostalgia, but it's definitely nostalgia. Given that they put so much effort into the aesthetic of every single Pokemon, and the fact that they spent so much time showcasing each of the Pokemon's abilities, it's no wonder OG fans are frothing at the mouth like a middle schooler discovering Gardevoir material for the first time. I'm assuming it's middle school for my mostly American audience, as Australia doesn't have such a thing. We get it, Pokemon are cute, but personally I prefer some actual substance to my movie about fictional monsters battling and solving mysteries. Oh yeah, sure, look at the cute puppy. Never mind that the account owner is a trust fund recipient who frequently renames dogs just because they have ethnic names. Maybe it's because I'm not an OG Pokemon fan like most people. When I was a kid, my parents didn't really let me have a console until I was almost in high school, and at that point it was already Gen 4. I loved the shit out of Pokemon Diamond, Platinum, Soul Silver, Black, and Black 2. But after X and Y, I fell out of love. Maybe it's because a certain director took over and watered things down, but regardless, I thought this was the year I could get back into the franchise proper. Between this and the new game, things were looking up for the franchise. Unfortunately, it's strike one at the moment. Yeah, sorry Nintendo, it's gonna take a lot more than a Cynthia cameo to get an F-grade YouTuber on board. I think the height of stupidity was this one scene featuring Torterra, where you see a bunch of genetically modified giant ones stand up and shake the very ground beneath their feet, and on their backs. Everything's crazy, the characters are falling all over the place, and when all's said and done, they just sit back down. They could have walked off into the sunset, battled it out, caused a stampede, but nope. They just sit down because scene's over. They don't want to waste any CGI because Bulbasaur is in the next scene, so scene over. At this point, I facepalmed so hard the person next to me turned over to me in confusion. It was the single most frustrating scene in the whole movie because all that potential was just thrown out the window thanks to the horrid pacing. It was easily the second most annoying thing at that showing, the first being a couple having intercourse in the first row. You're expecting a joke, but it was I! A genuinely concerned moviegoer who's just getting annoyed by some morons in the cinema. Exhibition's illegal, you know! Between these issues and the multitude of others, especially the obnoxious character played by Catherine Newton, fault of the writers, not the actress, I left the cinema feeling incredibly disappointed. And this isn't even touching on the fact that all the best scenes from the first 80% of the movie are spoiled in the trailers. It was opening night with a semi-full audience, and I can count on one hand how many times the audience laughed. When you're hiring a comedic powerhouse such as Ryan Reynolds, it's kinda disappointing when all the jokes are only funny the first time around. So yes, the film isn't really good. Whilst I do admit I kinda had a little bit of fun with it, mainly for nostalgia reasons, this doesn't feel like a film as much as it feels like a proof of concept. I get that the film didn't exactly have a crazy budget compared to most modern blockbusters, as adaptations for video games and anime are a risky endeavor, and Pokemon is both, so you have double the risk. Even for one of the most lucrative franchises in the world, so high in profile that certain Transformers fans think it has some kind of impact on masterpiece figures, it's not a surefire money-making opportunity. I imagine deviating from the source material would be another risk on top of that, so making necessary changes to allow the story to work in a film format falls into that category. I understand why they wanted to focus on having the Pokemon front and center for their first outing in this bite-sized adventure that doesn't require too many brain cells. I appreciate that it's a self-contained story that doesn't try to force sequel bait down your throat, but as a film, it's not a particularly cohesive experience. I'd argue that from a narrative perspective, the original Mario Bros. Movie has more cohesion. Sure, that film has a ton of other problems, but I'm more inclined to watch that film again thanks to the batshit insanity presented in every frame. It may be more ironic enjoyment, but compare that to my lack of desire to watch Detective Pikachu again? That's kinda sad. With all that said and done though, I still recommend you go see it for yourself. The first reason would be obvious, my opinion is very much in the minority and most people will gloss over things and take a swift chug of that Pokemon's Kool-Aid. The second goes somewhat against what I've been discussing this entire video, but unfortunately given the way the movie industry works, it's all we can do. 9 times out of 10, studios only care about one thing: money. Not every studio is like Hasbro, constantly stalking discussion threads and taking feedback. We all know what happens when a company does not give a flying f*** about its source material. If Detective Pikachu does poorly at the box office, I fear this might be it for the future of video game movies. It doesn't matter if the film has horrible pacing and a god-awful script. If the film doesn't go well, I guarantee Warner Brothers will think, well, we've tried being faithful and that didn't work. I guess we've got to start appealing to the lowest common denominator again. Especially given how it's been released during the worst possible time, going toe-to-toe with the potential highest-grossing film of all time, suck it Avatar, this film needs support. Yes, they've confirmed 3 sequels already. That being said, Warner Brothers isn't the biggest studio on the block, and if Detective Pikachu doesn't do well, these sequels could very well be cancelled. For all its faults, this film needs public support if things are going to get better. We're making baby steps in the adaptations of video games, and although there are far better ones on the market, I can't help but feel we have to pick and choose our battles. So that's the thing. At best, this film is mediocre. And normally I wouldn't go to support such films, but hey, if the Bumblebee situation is anything to go by, Hollywood is learning. We are getting adaptations closer to the original. Terrible hacks are now being booted out, and general moviegoing is better than it's ever been. We're in a new time, and as such, we've got to
Well, Doc, it seems like you're done goofed. I've been hired by the Pokemon Company to take your shit down. Except it seems taking it down ain't enough. So I gotta erase your viewers' memories. Just give me a second. Watch the birdie. Oh! Jesus Christ! Me! Ow, me eyes! Oh! If I weren't a 1,000-year-old wizard, I would have lost my memory. Oh, I forgot the sunglasses. Jesus Christ. Me eyes. Me eyes. They burn. They burn.